Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today I'm talking about how do you get promoted to manager. And I've got 5 things that I'm going to share with you. But before we get into those 5 things, I want to cover off on a few things that are going to form the foundation of everything we talk about. Number 1, a promotion into a manager, and which is a people leadership position, has to be made for the right reasons. And the right reason is not just that the only thing you want is to progress in your career. There are lots of different options and lots of different career paths available now more than ever before for if you want to stay in an individual contributor role. It does not mean that you are not progressing in your career if you stay in an IC role. It's okay. There are specializations and things you can do. And if your company does not have this in place already and have the framework and have the layout and setup, that's okay. You can bring it to them and tell them that, listen, I don't want to only progress my career by becoming a people leader. I want to continue to develop my skills and add more value to the organization. Here's some ideas on how I might do that. That's an okay option. Now, if you want to get into the people leadership role and you want to get promoted to manager, then that has everything to do with what we're talking about today. And the most important shift that you need to become aware of, and this is probably one of the most difficult shifts, if not the most difficult shift anybody will ever make in their professional career, is going from managing yourself to managing other people. The reason why this is so tough is that when you're managing yourself, you're in complete control. Whether you deliver what you say or exceed expectations or don't meet expectations, your performance, it's 100% up to you. But when you're in a people leadership position, and you're managing other people, it's no longer up to you. You're no longer in control. You have to cede that control, and now you have to focus on influencing other people and doing everything possible to make sure they are successful. And when they are successful, that's when you become successful. So the focus of your world from a psychology perspective has to shift dramatically. You need to be aware of that and be ready for that if you're in an IC role today and you want to get promoted to manager. So again, continuing to progress in your career does not just mean going down a people leadership path. That's the way it has been for a long time, but companies are waking up to the fact that there are some people who don't align with a people leadership position and don't want to do it, and that's okay. Because guess what? Being a people leader is hard. Right? There are no easy days in this. And when you are responsible for other people and responsible for the performance of other people, it's a completely different ballgame than being responsible for your performance and being responsible for yourself. Now, when I went through this transition in my career, it was a turning point. I was at an individual contributor level for nearly the first 10 years of my professional career. That's right. I didn't know where to go, what to do, how to do it. And I was just kind of bouncing around aimlessly, trying to figure out where I fit. And it wasn't until I got an MBA in management and organizational behavior that I realized the true power and potential of management and leadership. And that's why I dedicated the rest of my career to focusing on the growth and development of my leadership skills, but also empowering others. That's why I run the B2B Leaders Academy and have been a leadership coach for over a decade, helping people transition and transform from individual contributor to manager, manager to director, director to VP, VP to C-level. So we're going to get into the top 5 things right now that you can do to prepare yourself for transitioning from an individual contributor to a manager and earning your next promotion. Before I was ever promoted into a people leadership position as a manager, I got an MBA in management and organizational behavior. And one of the reasons why I felt this was so important was at the time I realized that I had a lot of incredible skill sets across the board, but the area that I lacked any experience at all in was people management. And I had an interest in going and getting an MBA, and the whole backstory on why that is a time for a different episode. But what I did was get an MBA, and then when I found out and discovered the field of management and organizational behavior, I was lit on fire. I was absolutely passionate about everything that I learned. And keep in mind that I was learning about all of this while not being in a people leadership position. And that's one of the important things I want to underscore through everything I'm going to talk about in this episode, is that you oftentimes need to acquire the skills that you're going to need for the next role before you ever get into that role. Because had I waited until I actually got into a people leadership position to then think about going and getting an MBA, it would have been too late. I would have missed some opportunities. So instead, I took the advanced approach and said, you know what, I want this to get these skills in advance of being in that position so that when I get into that position, I will be set up for success. Now that was the first time that I did that, and it was a dramatic game changer for me because it enabled me to put myself in a position a couple years down the line to be ready to be promoted into a manager position. Now the second time came right in tandem with being promoted. So I was an individual contributor. I was a customer success manager working on the front lines in a B2B SaaS business in downtown San Francisco in the early days of SaaS, even earlier days of customer success. And I recognized that I really wanted to be in a people leadership position. Company was growing. I figured it would be a great opportunity. But it had been several years since my MBA, and while I had all those skills and they were great, I didn't feel like I was progressing enough. So I actually convinced my company to let me take time off, not PTO, take time off, and go through a leadership coach training program, which I financed and paid for completely 100% by myself. Now, this program was transformational because they taught me how to be a leadership coach. I was not even in a people leadership position, and I knew this coaching skill set was going to pay huge dividends down the line, so I was willing to make the investment of several $1,000s that I did not have at the time. I was raising a young family in the Bay Area. There were a lot of constraints and a lot of stress, but I recognized that acquiring that skill set before I ever got into a people leadership position, again, would set me up for success in the future. And it did. It continues to this day to be one of the greatest sets of tools that I have in my leadership toolbox, and one of the most powerful and impactful that when members of the B2B Leaders Academy go through the coaching training that I provide now, completely changes the game on how they show up with them and their teams. So the number one thing you can do right now is to develop your leadership skills. Long before you're in a people leadership position. The amount of time you have to get there does not matter. But if you are focused on developing your skill set, you will be able to add more value to your organization and to your future team. And that's what we want. That's what you have to demonstrate before getting the opportunity to be a people manager. Now, you don't have to go get an MBA, go through a leadership coach training program, or attend the countless other trainings that I've been through in order to prepare yourself by acquiring leadership skills before getting promoted to manager. I want you to be able to take the fast track, and that's why I created the B2B Leaders Academy. I took all my personal experience and my experience coaching senior leaders and executives for a decade and boiled it down to what I call the Elite Leader Roadmap. And if you follow this roadmap, you will have the absolute best set of leadership skills to be successful in whatever role or capacity you start with as a manager or move on to director, VP, or C-level. And if you'd like me to walk you through it and see exactly what the Elite Leader Roadmap is, just go to b2bleadersacademy.com/demo, and I'll walk you through the Elite Leader Roadmap in a short 15-minute presentation. The second thing you can do to get ready for a promotion to manager is to build relationships. Relationships are going to be an incredibly important part of your role as a manager, but also right now while you're an individual contributor and throughout the process of being promoted from IC to manager. So here's what's going to happen when there's a need identified by your organization that we need a new manager and you want to be on the short list. So your manager, direct boss today, is going to identify the need. They're going to have some discussions with their bosses and others and say, I need to promote someone into a manager position. Here's my short list of candidates. Okay, number one, you need to be on that short list. And number two, if you build relationships in the right way across your organization, you will support yourself without actually doing the supporting. Here's what I mean. Your boss will go to other leaders in the team, in the org, in the department, in the company, and ask for their opinion on you and the potential of you being promoted into a manager position. Now, you need to have very strong relationships with these other leaders so that when they are asked about you, there's a very, very favorable sentiment that is shared and there is trust that they will recommend you for that leadership position. Now, this doesn't mean you just go around and say, I want to be promoted to manager to everybody. It means you actually build a real relationship with the other people. And you get to know them and what they're working on, what their challenges and what their goals are, and they will get to know you and what your challenges, what your goals are. You cannot stay just focused on your little tiny world that you're in today as an individual contributor. You must build relationships that are much, much broader. So as an example, when I was a CSM, individual contributor, years and years ago, there was a gentleman who joined the sales team as a sales representative, individual contributor as well. And he and I formed a very strong relationship. We're actually still friends to this day, 10 years plus later. And he's a wonderful, wonderful person. And the relationship that we formed was based on mutual respect and trust, and me helping him and him helping me. That was all it took. It took me taking that initiative to make sure that we were building a relationship because I wanted him in my corner, period. Just like I wanted everybody I built a relationship with in my corner. Now, when I got promoted to a manager position and then ultimately ended up at that company a few years later becoming the director of the organization, he was also promoted from individual sales rep to director, and he led the sales organization. So now we were two leaders of our respective organizations that had a deep relationship for years based on mutual trust and respect. Right? The right time to build a relationship is not when you need one. The right time to build a relationship is right now. And if you're not doing this today, even as an individual contributor, you need to build relationships across your team, but across your department and also across your company. So make it a point to spend time building relationships with these others. And then when your boss goes around and tries to find out who's going to be the best candidate, you will be at the top of that list. The third thing that you can do to get promoted to manager is demonstrate initiative. Now, managers are expected to take initiatives on projects and identifying problems, solving problems, so there's no better way to prove that you are ready than by demonstrating that you can do exactly the same thing. You can assess a situation, you can identify the issue, you can identify some potential solutions, and you can solve the problem before anybody asks you to solve it. That's the key. If you are proactive and you demonstrate initiative, you will be seen as a leader, and you will be positioning yourself in the right way before you get promoted to manager. Now, when I was a CSM, one of the first things that I did to demonstrate this exact concept of taking initiative was I recognized that we were doing the same training with our customers over and over and over. And I had a set of customers, all my other CSMs on the team had a set of customers, and there was essentially one part of our onboarding process that was very repetitive and extremely manual. And I realized that all we were doing was just showing up to the call and regurgitating the same thing over and over. It was a different customer on the end of the line every time, which was fine, but we were doing the same thing over and over. And quite frankly, this was a little bit boring for me. So what I did was take a look at that as a problem. The problem was I was spending time, and the entire team was spending time doing something that wasn't a high value task. So what I did was look at that communication that we were trying to get through during the onboarding process, and I extracted the most important elements of it, and I created a guide, a written guide in a PDF with a nice little letterhead from the company, nothing fancy. And I tested this with my clients first. I would send them this guide, give them instructions on how to follow it, and then I had a conversation with them afterwards that was infinitely more meaningful and more value driving. Now, when I got some great success with this, and the customers really appreciated the fact that I broke this into two and they didn't have to spend time just listening to me kind of drone on about the steps to follow is relatively straightforward. They appreciated it, and the level of conversation we were able to have about the application of what the topic was we were covering was infinitely more valuable than just covering the training. So I brought this to my broader team. I said, team, here's what I've done as a way to improve my efficiency and make this a lot more interesting to me and deliver a much more meaningful and insightful conversation with our customer. And they loved it. And when my boss and boss's boss found out about what I did and how I looked at that situation, identified the problem, came up with a solution, implemented it myself, and then brought a plan to the rest of the team, I was cementing myself as an incredible leader within this team, and nobody ever asked me to do any of this. Now, if you've listened to some of the other podcast interviews, I've done over 75 at this recording as of the recording of this episode, you'll notice that in every single conversation, when I ask, how'd you get promoted into your first leadership position, the guest almost always says, there was an opportunity and I took it. Very rarely did somebody actually get approached and say, I need you to become a people leader. It happened like maybe once or twice out of 75 different interviews. But what's fascinating is that each of these leaders that are now sometimes up at VP and C levels started off and got promoted to the manager position because they took initiative and they identified a problem and they proposed a solution and then they were asked to go and implement the solution. There's no better way to set yourself up for success as a manager than by demonstrating initiatives. So that's the third thing that you can do to get ready to be promoted to manager. The fourth thing you can do to get promoted to manager is expand your knowledge. As an individual contributor, you know your world. You're focused on it all the time. You know what your customers are working on. You know what you are working on. But how much do you really know about the broader industry, about your company, about its impact on things that are way beyond your control or even way beyond your influence today? Well, one of the most important things to demonstrate is your knowledge. And if you can increase your knowledge base and see things from a much higher and different perspective, you're going to set yourself apart from everyone else who just has tunnel vision focused on what's right in front of them. Let me give you an example here. So Jack Welch, CEO of General Electric, one of the most successful CEOs in recent history. When he was an individual contributor at General Electric, before he ever got promoted, one of the things that he was asked to do was, in conjunction with a set of other individual contributors, was to develop a report based on these plastic products that they were trying to sell. He was in the plastics division at GE at the time. Now, everybody went off and did research and came to the table with some analysis and, ideas on what they could do to market and sell their products. What Jack did was head and shoulders above everybody else, because while everyone else was focused on the product, Jack looked at the entire industry and looked at where it was going and where it would be 5 and 10 years down the line. So he expanded his knowledge through his own personal research on his own personal time and came up with a completely different approach and a completely different way to present his ideas. And that allowed him to stand out from his team significantly, to the point where he was promoted, and then obviously down the line he became CEO and chairman, was very successful. So there are opportunities right now that you have to expand your knowledge. And I don't just mean about your product. That's critically important. It's kind of table stakes. But what I'm talking about is even beyond that. I'm talking about your industry and the industries that you influence and your company influences and that you partake in. When I was a CSM, an individual contributor, I read blogs, lots and lots of blogs. I went to conferences, I consumed news, I had Google Alerts set up for every single one of my customers so that I always knew kind of the big picture of what was going on. Whether it was a funding announcement or a new release or something in the press, good, bad, or ugly about them, I wanted to know what it was because I needed that broader perspective of what was going on in the market in order to inform the conversations that I was having. And as I did this, I was recognized as someone who was standing out and was different from everybody else. Everybody else was pretty much focused on just the product, but I wanted to be focused on the product and the market and the perspective and the guidance and the expertise. And so that was how I expanded my knowledge. So if you expand your knowledge today, you're going to set yourself up for that promotion to manager. The fifth thing that you can do to get promoted to manager is to seek feedback. Feedback is one of the most important elements because it's going to help you learn and grow. Where you might not be able to see everything that's happening or the impact that your actions are having, feedback will be your ultimate guide and direction. Now, you can't just ask your direct manager or other leaders or other people, peers or whatnot, and just say, I'd like for you to give me feedback on my work. Like, it's too big, it's too broad, it's too vague. And when asked a vague question, people will provide a very vague answer. And vagueness is what we want to avoid because we need very specific, actionable things that you can do. So here's what you need to do in order to transform something from a vague request for feedback to something very specific, so that you go from a vague response from them to something very specific that you can take action on. So here's an example. Maybe this is to your direct manager. I'd like to ask for your feedback on my performance. Okay, too big, too broad, too vague. Your manager is going to feel put on the spot and have no idea how to respond to that question, and probably share a lot of stuff across the board, and most of it probably won't be actionable. But if we take the same situation where you're having a one-on-one with your manager and you ask them, let's get specific on the feedback request. So, Mr. or Mrs. Manager, I would like feedback on my performance with this project that you just saw complete last week. And specifically, I want to know your perspective on how I ran this project from beginning to middle to end, which you've been part of over the last 3 weeks. Now, that is a much more specific ask for feedback than just, I'd like feedback on my performance. And it's up to you to ask that level of specificity. Your manager is not going to figure this out on their own. They have other things going on, other problems to handle, other people to focus on. So when it comes to seeking feedback, remember, you have to be specific. If you are specific, you will get a specific answer. If you are vague, you will get a vague answer. And one of my favorite sayings is that what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. And if your feedback that you get is vague, there is no action that you can take on it, and you're not going to make progress, and you're not going to set yourself up for the promotion to manager. So seek the feedback, but make it specific. In summary, we've covered 5 things you can do to get promoted to manager. Number 1, develop leadership skills. Number 2, build relationships. Number 3, demonstrate initiative. Number 4, expand your knowledge. And number 5, seek feedback. And as you put these into action, you might have some questions, you might have some challenges, you might face hurdles that you have not faced before, and you might want to be in a position like on some of the stories that I shared, where you acquire leadership skills and leadership tools before you actually get into a people leadership position. And if that's the case, I'd love to partner with you to help you make a successful case for why you should become a manager and make a successful transition to manager by empowering you with the tools before you actually get into the position. So if you're interested, come to b2bleadersacademy.com/demo, and I'll walk you through the Elite Leader Roadmap in a matter of 15 minutes, and you can make a decision on whether or not that's an appropriate path for you, and maybe we'll get a chance to work together. So until next time, take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.